The students laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough for the man holding the mop to hear. Enough for the embarrassment to sting. Daniel Carter lowered his eyes and continued cleaning the floor. He was used to it. People rarely looked at janitors. And when they did, they often assumed things. The university was one of the most prestigious in the country. Future scientists. Future engineers. Future professors. Future leaders. Daniel cleaned lecture halls at night and early mornings. The job paid the bills. Barely. As a single father raising his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, every dollar mattered. Every shift mattered. Every hour mattered. That morning he was cleaning the front row of a mathematics lecture hall when a student accidentally dropped a notebook. Papers scattered everywhere. Daniel immediately helped gather them. As he handed them back, he noticed something written across one page. A complicated equation. Without thinking, he smiled. Interesting approach. The student blinked. What? Daniel pointed politely. The third step. A pause. You can simplify it. The student laughed. Sure. Daniel nodded. I'm serious. Before he could say more, a voice interrupted. Professor Olivia Hart. One of the university's most respected mathematicians. And one of its most intimidating. She had written textbooks. Published groundbreaking research. Won international awards. She also had very little patience for interruptions. Is there a problem? The student grinned. The janitor was giving me math advice. Several students chuckled. Professor Hart glanced toward Daniel. Then toward the equation. Then back again. A faint smile appeared. Not a kind one. Really? Daniel immediately looked uncomfortable. I was only trying to help. The professor folded her arms. And what exactly were you helping with? Daniel pointed at the notebook. The substitution step. Professor Hart barely looked. Then came the sentence that would spread across campus by lunchtime. Mr. Carter, if you could solve graduate-level mathematics, I doubt you'd be pushing a mop. The room erupted with laughter. Daniel said nothing. Simply lowered his eyes. Picked up the mop. And continued working. The professor turned and began her lecture. The moment seemed over. But one student noticed something unusual. Daniel wasn't upset. He looked disappointed. As though the comment had reminded him of something he'd spent years trying to forget. The lecture continued. Halfway through, Professor Hart introduced a difficult problem. One she often used to challenge advanced students. The room became silent. Nobody could solve it. Not immediately. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Still nothing. Finally Professor Hart smiled. It's harder than it looks. At that exact moment, a quiet voice came from the back of the room. You're missing a symmetry. The room froze. Slowly, everyone turned. Daniel stood beside his janitor cart. Professor Hart stared. What did you say? Daniel looked like a man who instantly regretted speaking. But it was too late now. The proof. He pointed carefully. There's a hidden symmetry. A few students laughed. Professor Hart did not. Because Daniel wasn't guessing. He was looking directly at the correct section of the problem. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely interested. Come here. The room became completely silent. Daniel hesitated. Then slowly walked toward the board. Professor Hart handed him the marker. A gesture nobody expected. Least of all Daniel. Show us. The students leaned forward. Some amused. Some curious. most expecting disaster. Daniel stared at the board for several seconds. Then he began writing. The first line looked ordinary. The second line looked clever. The third line made several graduate students sit upright. By the fifth line, nobody was laughing anymore. Professor Hart's expression changed. Then changed again. Because Daniel wasn't merely solving the problem. He was approaching it in a way she'd never seen before. The room became so quiet that the marker scratching against the board sounded loud. Line after line appeared. Elegant. Simple. Unexpected. Finally Daniel stepped back. Silence. Absolute silence. Professor Hart walked toward the board. Studied the proof. Read it again. Then a third time. The students waited. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At last, the professor turned around. And for the first time in her career, she looked completely speechless. Because Daniel hadn't just solved the problem. He had uncovered something hidden inside it. Something she had never noticed. Something that might lead to an entirely new theorem. Then she asked the question nobody saw coming. Mr. Carter. A pause. Who are you? Daniel looked at the floor. And quietly replied. I used to be somebody else. What happened next would reveal a secret Daniel had hidden for 15 years. And leave the entire university stunned. The lecture hall was completely silent. 30 graduate students stared at Daniel. Professor Hart stared at Daniel. Even the students in the hallway had stopped walking. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He clearly wasn't enjoying the attention. Professor Hart set down the marker. What do you mean? A pause. You used to be somebody else? Daniel looked toward the board. The equations. The symbols. The language he hadn't spoken publicly in years. Then he sighed. 15 years ago, I was a mathematician. The room froze. A few students exchanged skeptical glances. Professor Hart didn't. Because nobody accidentally produces a proof like the one on the board. Nobody. What kind of mathematician? She asked quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. Theoretical. Several students sat up straighter. Theoretical mathematics was not a hobby. Not something people casually mastered. Professor Hart folded her arms. Where? Daniel hesitated, then answered. I was a research fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study. This time there were audible gasps. One student nearly dropped his laptop. Because the institute was legendary. A place associated with some of the greatest mathematical minds in history. Professor Hart's eyes widened. You worked there? Daniel nodded. For a moment nobody spoke. Then a student finally asked. If that's true. A pause. Why are you a janitor?